Our midfield lowered their colours tonight. Too slow, too tall, too old. They'll all come our way, we know that.
Who's the best young player coming through? Warple won at best and fairest. He was picked 40 in the draft, and he is what he is, Warple.
Lordo, you're concerned that they are just middle of the rung and they are a long way off from challenging for another flag.
Clarko, to me, doesn't want to go down to the bottom. He doesn't want to bottom out. He wants to stay around the point, but I think with what they've got, they're not going to challenge at all for a long, long time.
There's just not a lot of inspiration coming from Ben Stratton, who just doesn't influence games like a captain needs to.
They just offered nothing offensively, and it was just slow, boring.
We won't be sacking Clarko. Clarko won't be sacking us.
They need to go to the draft, and they need to invest heavily in the youth. Now, Clarko doesn't appear to be willing to do that, which I think will be a mistake and set the Hawthorn back a number of years in the future.
We just looked flat and lethargic and just couldn't get our game going. And part of me wants to smack the players in a sense, because it's just like, God, that effort seems so unacceptable. We're sick of making excuses, but at the same time we know that there's a really, really significant excuse for why we're 1-9 on the road this year.
Yes, how the mighty have fallen. Welcome back to Footy Classified. Tough time to be a Hawthorn supporter, Ross. 3 premierships in 13, 14 and 15. 2 final series in the 4 seasons since. But Lloydie, I want to start with you. Losing to a team who was previously winless after 13 games, did that performance change your view of the Hawks and where they're at?
We've had discussions, as you just saw, over the last probably 10 weeks about where Hawthorn are at, and it happens. Sometimes you think you're more competitive than you are. And this is Clarko over the last couple of weeks. This is the stoppage coach, Scotty Burns, copping it from Clarko at three-quarter time because they lost their way in the midfield, and that's him, Clarko, on the weekend having a go at Luke Bruce. You can see the frustration that he's got, and why wouldn't he be frustrated? He hasn't got the personnel that he once had, and they've now lost 9 of their last 10 after starting the season at 1-3. And what was most damning is the Adelaide Crows midfield hasn't got hold of any team this year, and they mauled the Hawthorn midfield. It was plus 11 inside 50s, plus 25 contested possessions, plus 45 uncontested possessions, Ross. And, he would be sitting back, and you're only as good as your cattle sometimes as a coach, and he just hasn't got it there. So they maybe thought they were close enough at the start of the year, but the reality would have set in that, maybe they thought they could be better than they were at the start of the season.
Well, reality's kicked in now.
It has.
1-9 out of their last 10, and Alistair's bona fide great coach. We know that, and they had the three-peat. I think he's been entitled to do what he did post then, 16, 17, 18. You can go into the detail, but he needs to just acknowledge, which I think he is, but it's hard. He's protecting his players. Probably what was unusual was putting forward the excuses or the reasons, and they are reasons, but the good teams have been able to come it. So it's really just feedback. We're not as good as maybe I thought I was because we haven't been able to overcome the challenges, which typically they would, and a good team would. So the feedback's clear. They need to recalibrate.
Ed, so your cohort or counterpart, Jeff Kennett, has signed on for another term and made it clear when he wrote his letter to members last week that there will be no decision or any discussion about the coach until the end of 2022. What do you read into that?
Oh, I've read into what he's just said. I mean, I think you've got to take the foot off Hawthorn a little bit at the moment. They recruited those players in. If they all stood up, they're probably a top 4 chance. They've had injuries. Sometimes your time comes, and it's often like the coyote in the Roadrunner. They go off the cliff and they stay up for a while, and then bang, down it goes. And I just think Hawthorn are getting their turn. They've had some injuries. As far as Jeff's concerned, why would you go looking for another coach if you've got Alistair Clarkson sitting in the office that knows how to do all these things? He knows the capability of his players. And I just reckon Hawthorn are rope-a-doping a little bit. They're not going to say anything. They'll let the media speculation go. They've got Graham Wright. They've got all the support staff down there. They'll be doing things. They're a smart club. They haven't been found wanting in the past, and you'd expect them to bounce pretty quickly, at least get their strategy right.
I think it's interesting, though, that Jeff is actually not saying we're not even going to talk about extending or do anything to the contract till the end of 2022. And I don't feel...
Why would they extend him, though, Caro?
That's
a long time. I mean, it's 2022. It's 2 seasons in AFL football. That's an eternity. I mean, you don't even know what's going on these days in the next month, far less in 2 years' time.
I just don't... I'm not as confident...
He's got a contract.
Yeah, absolutely, and he'll honour that. But it's interesting that they won't even look at extending it. I feel that they're not on the same page at the moment. There are different views within the club about whether they go back to the draft or whether they keep operating through free agency or to a large extent.
You mentioned, Eddie mentioned Graham Wright. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off, Eddie. Ross, he and his recruiting team have some pretty big decisions to make at the end of the year, as they would in most years, but particularly this year. Look at some of these names, and we talk about the end of a golden era. How would you manage some of these players, Ross, if you're coaching?
Well, I'm on the Clark. I'm quite loyal to the loyal servants, and they're clearly delivered. Burgoyne's delegate, can he get the 400 games? Personally, I don't think it's about a game number. He's multiple premiership player and one of the all-time greats. So, you know, going on to 38, I think it's sort of outside the norm. Isaac Smith still, I saw him against Brisbane round 3. He was BOG. He can get, I think Puopolo just on form and would go. Ben Stratton's a captain, very delicate. For all his 31, fullbacks are hard to find. And Henderson, before his medial, was great running. But I think there's a bit, if they're free agencies, they wouldn't want to pay overs for them. So if they get offers and they go, that might just give them some cap room to get some young talent through. The
big thing for Alistair, Ross, and you've been through this a number of times, is you started the build with Fremantle, with the players that you brought in. You made hard decisions on, say, Michael Barlow and Zungu at the end. And then you've started Matty de Boer, and you've started now with, you know, guys like Chera and Brayshaw, and the list goes on. Clarko may have to do that for somebody else over the next couple of years.
Yeah, no. You reckon he's warming the seat for the
Sam
Mitchell?
I'm just saying, I'm not for Sam or anyone, I'm just saying who knows what happens in 2 years' time, but the next 2 years...
You put your ego to the side as a coach, you put your ego and your win-loss to the side, and you do... I said, I'm all in, I'm not protecting anything. Yes. Chera and Brayshaw played 40 out of 44 games in their first year. Luke Ryan, Cox, you know, Taberner was 8. And the next person, Mark Harvey, put some work in. I came in. Grant Thomas, Blight, that's just the cycle we're in.
Well,
that's just the way it works.
Not if you were listening to what the coach had to say last night after the game. This is Alistair on the compromised draft.
There's not a pure draft anymore. The draft is just so compromised that, you know, with father-sons and academies, that's going to make it enormously difficult for a lot of other clubs to try to, like North Melbourne and us, and, you know, clubs that do find themselves in the bottom part of the ladder at this present time. To find your path back is difficult. So that's why when people say, "Oh, well, why don't you just rebuild and you know, just go to the draft?" You can't go to the draft; it's so compromised.
Can understand exactly what he's saying there. You can't just say, "Let's go to the draft" because of the issues that we've got coming up in this compromised draft, which we think is the most compromised draft in the history. Some experts in the field reckon these guys could all go in the top 30. And there's 10 of them there that are already linked to other clubs. So now we understand what Alice is talking about there, why you can't just say go to the draft. You've got to still look at players from other clubs in these situations.
And this is a club who had four father-sons in the last 10 to 12 years, so 13 years. So, I mean, let's not be too...
I don't think he's complaining. I don't think that he's saying that Hawthorn haven't had their fair share. But, Eddie, this is a topic that you've been talking about for a number of years.
Yeah, probably 20 years, I reckon, Sam. You keep mucking around with the draft, you're not going to let teams be able to regenerate. It's as simple as that. I mean, they keep coming in all these different things. I've always said that the academies are a great thing to produce players, but they should be open to everybody having a go. Now, these days, of course, you have to give up points, so it makes it a little bit more equitable. And certainly the father-son skewed teams, and my team did very well out of it. So I'm not complaining about it, but I don't agree with it. It's like a lot of things these days. You can actually disagree, but once they set the rules, you go, right, we're all in. So it is. It's, you know, I think the one thing that you've got to have is an uncompromised draft if you're going to have any success in turning things over quickly. And I agree with everything Alistair Clarkson said last night. I agree with what he said. From his point of view, where they've been up the ladder, it's probably been useless to try and go to the draft. They're better off going to get people who could just stick in their suit, keep it going, get these players. They've had remarkable success in getting players fit. They might have overdone that. Maybe went for a couple that didn't quite come off this year. But you know what? Maybe this is the year that they get some run into the legs of Scully. Mitchell always takes a year after a bloke badly breaks a leg like that. He might be cherry ripe next year. They might bounce quickly. You never know.
I actually think they should have gone back to the draft sooner than when they did. Alistair had a bit to say about list sizes too. He wasn't in a very good mood last night. Let's have a listen.
Really, really frustrating for everyone involved in the game. And this is across all 18 clubs. We still haven't been told how many our list size is going to be. So how can we possibly work out contracting for next year? And I can't understand what the delay is on that. You're asking us to make decisions on what we do next year with our second tier. You don't know how many players are going to be on your list, so you've got to get that right in the first instance. So please, AFL, give us some information. We need it badly.
Did he say that during the game, or what was he post-game? Sorry, Clarko. There's discussions going on that with all the relevant parties, and I don't think we've been too far behind on many things this year. So we'll get enough time for everyone to make decisions.
If you thought that was a clip, multiplied by about 10, how a lot of people at other clubs in the AFL felt about Alistair after a bad loss, pointing the finger at others. I mean, sorry, that's really tough. Everyone's working so hard to get this season on the line. We know there's a negotiation going on between Ray Gunston and the Players Association. It's going to be a long, hard negotiation. And I think Alistair, like most clubs, has a rough idea how many are on their list next year. And I don't think that is any excuse at all.